AI cannot scale without strong data management. And also, data management itself is being reshaped by AI.
Clearly that know-how and information will be the operational heart of the business. How you do things, the rules that you have, the regulations that you have to conform to. That's not an IT thing. That is, genuinely part of the business operations.
Hello, and welcome to Data Enablers, the Edgematics podcast where we explore how organizations turn data into business value. I'm Raheel Khan, Chief Business Officer at Edgematics. And today we're discussing a topic that is becoming central to every serious enterprise technology conversation. That is the convergence of AI and data management. Now, for years, AI and data management were treated as separate priorities. AI is often seen as the world of innovation and experimentation and models and co-pilots and all sorts of automation. And on the other hand, data management is viewed through a different lens, that is integration, governance, data quality. You talk about compliance, data warehousing, etc. But that separation no longer works today. As AI moves from pilot programs into real enterprise operations or production, one thing is becoming very clear, that AI cannot scale without strong data management. And also, data management itself is being reshaped by AI. So, to unpack that interesting topic, I'm delighted to be joined by David Doherty, who is an ex CIO, a thought leader, and a technology advisor, and who brings both enterprise leadership perspective and also a very strong point of view on where data, AI, and the whole business transformation are heading. So, David, very warm welcome to you.
Yes, I spent a long career in the telecoms industry in a number of senior management positions, I guess, leading B2B product development, large technology change programs where we did a number of transformations. And I guess the last 15, 20 years maybe of my corporate career, I was a CIO in a number of UK-based but often international B2B managed services companies, wholesale network providers, and fiber cable companies and fiber ISPs. Um,
Amazing, amazing. That's really, really wonderful, David, and great to have you with us. I know there's a lot that we want to cover today on this great topic. And I think, yeah, let's just dive in straight in. What do you say?
yeah, sure. Well, firstly, I think there is a problem sometimes. We talk a lot about data,
Mhm.
and I think sometimes it can take on a bit of an esoteric type of view of this very specific, maybe ones and zeros type of data that people talk about. And I think if we're not careful, those of us in technology can easily drop into jargon, and we talk about things like data pipelines, data lakes, data orchestration, using phrases that our colleagues, our operational colleagues, maybe on the SLT or the board, you can see their eyes either glaze over or they're frowning in what exactly are you talking about. So I think we need to make sure that we share with them that actually data, when we talk about it in a shorthand, is actually about all the information and knowledge and know-how that's right across the company. And I think that's when we can move through and really understand the difference between what is that real information as opposed to just some esoteric data. And I think that's where you can start then having a conversation about ownership. Clearly that know-how and information will be the operational heart of the business. How you do things, the rules that you have, the regulations that you have to conform to. That's not an IT thing. That is, genuinely part of the business operations. But of course, the IT team, the technology teams can help. They can provide the means to manage and deploy this data rather than be the end in itself. And I think that's what's really important, to make sure we can work together in that way.
No, that's very, very powerful way to frame it. And I think defining data is very important at this point. Everybody has a very different perspective about data, and I think this is an excellent foundation for the discussion, because there is obviously a huge amount of excitement around AI, right? But also a lot of noise, you know. So, from your perspective, why is this conversation about AI and data management becoming so important at this moment?
Well, I think it's back to that point of, once you understand what this data is, that it is that knowledge and that know-how. You, I don't want to get into the whole debate about replacing people per se, but if you just use a very simple analogy, maybe, of if you're bringing on or onboarding a new person into a team, yes, you know that there is a certain amount of skill and knowledge and know-how that they come with, and that you might compare that to the LLM of the agentic that you're trying to implement. But then you need to understand, as a new person onboarding, how do you do things around here? What's the way we do things? Where do I get the information from? Where is that? Well, we need to find all that information and data and document it in some way. And we know this isn't all going to be in nicely defined documents. This is going to be spread across the company. We all know when people come into an operational role, they've got to do that. So we need to start thinking that way. How are we going to bring that information to an agent? Otherwise, how can they do a really good job that we want to actually implement?
No, absolutely. I think that's a very strong way to put it across. Just building on that, and you know, we're seeing this all the time. Why do so many AI initiatives, they look so impressive and so compelling in the pilot mode, but then you know they struggle when organizations they try to take this into the production or operationalize them? What's your view
Yeah.
on
Firstly, needs to come down to that basic item of any technology change is, what is it the business is trying to do here? What are we trying to do differently and improve from a business point of view? What's the outcome we're trying to achieve? And I think sometimes that can be done in isolation. You know, a proof of concept or a pilot is too either narrow, or is actually proving that the technology works rather than actually showing it can actually benefit the business. So that classic business case, let's call it, and it needs to pass the so what test. You know, we can do this, but maybe you can do it in other ways. If you're just looking to automate something, we've been able to automate things in lots of different ways for years now. Is this the right technology to use just for that? And then, of course, if you have got the right pilot set up, have you then made sure that maybe that slice of information that you've used in your pilot, when you expand it out, is your data complete? Is the quality good?
right?
Is it sufficient in order to carry out at scale what it is you wanted to do? So maybe, you know, at the pilot stage, it was fine because you made sure it had the answers. But when you give it the whole of your information and the whole of your customer base, maybe it doesn't. So it's really making sure that scale is balanced.
Yeah. So the issue is not, you know, whether AI can produce an answer or not. The issue is whether the answer is grounded in the trusted enterprise reality or not. You know, can the users trust that data? Can you know the enterprise depend on the data? I think that is a very important point. Now let's look at the other side of the equation. You know, we talked about why AI needs modern data management, but why does data management need AI?
In telecommunications, there's hundreds, there's thousands of maybe events, you know, things happening. So quite dynamically, maybe you've got a large network, lots of things happening. You've got field service engineers out in the field fixing things, installing things. You've got customer interactions. You've got billing going on. There's lots of dynamic things, as well as, of course, very good static or maybe slow moving data. So all of that is happening at quite a rate. And the volume of information, as I said, needs to be significantly more than we might have talked about before. So being able to actually harness all of that information in real time in a way that's properly linked in a qualitative and quantitative way, and is making sure that we're not going off in the wrong way, that the semantics are right, that we've got the context correct. Only really the power of AI agents can help manage that data in relatively real time, because it would be almost impossible to do that in other ways. So I think that's where AI can actually help the data management, if we use management as a broad sense of actually corralling and being able to get it under control, but also get value out of it in the way that we want it to be used.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you touched a very important point there, in terms of semantics, or the meaning of data.
Yeah.
That's really important. Meaning definitely matters, just as much as movement of data is important. Yeah, that's a great point, David.
So, Raheel, maybe I could ask you a question if that's okay. There's lots of data, there's lots of new AI agents. Companies are thinking about how they utilize it. How do you get all that under control? Where do you start? Companies like Edgematics, this is what you do, isn't it? I mean, how can Edgematics tool set help companies to actually get this under control and just make it easy? Because at the end of the day, as we said, the business people want to get on with actually running the business in a better way,
Yeah.
not, you know, wrangle all this data.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great question. You surely got me on the spot on that, but I'll give it a shot. So, talking to so many customers, David, from what we see, I think the biggest disconnect is that many organizations, they still approach AI with the use case first mindset, without fully understanding whether the underlying enterprise knowledge, as you nicely explained, and the data foundation, are they ready to support those use cases at scale. So that's a big challenge that we see in the market. And there is often strong ambition at the leadership level. People want co-pilots and intelligent automation and better decision making for sure, and obviously faster, I would say, value from AI. But underneath that ambition, the data is often, I would say, fragmented. It's still inconsistent, and it lacks the ownership and the governance and the business context that is needed for the AI to be trusted. So at Edgematics, we see that organizations who are making the strongest progress are the ones that stop treating data as a technical asset alone, and they've already started to treat it as the knowledge base of the enterprise. So I think that shift, I believe, is critical, and it's no longer about asking how do we deploy AI, but actually it's about asking how do we build a trusted AI-ready enterprise, around the knowledge and the information our business depends on everyday basis. So I think that's the shift that we are seeing changing. And as far as Edgematics is concerned, we help customers handhold right from the point where they are thinking about AI, to putting a foundation in place, to identifying use cases, to prioritizing use case, and then trying to get to some quick wins to show how AI can effectively help them in some of their critical day-to-day operations. But I think that's where we come in, and very excited to help our customers on that journey. That brings us to the next important topic, which is governance. So governance has often been seen as the control issue in the past, but in the AI world, I would argue that it has become more of a growth issue. So how do you see that, David?
What we're really talking about is that whole visibility, observability. You know, what are the rules? Are we following those rules? Are rules set? So it may not be, it may be, and if not, who is setting those rules for both the data and the AI to exist? Who is observing? Is the data ready now? Have we got completeness? Have we got quality? Who is responsible for that? And it needs to be the right people and the right teams in the operational areas. And then how is AI then operating across that? How well is it performing? Is it doing what we thought? Are we getting reports of hallucinations, or are we just getting bad delivery or too many that there has to be sent to somebody else?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think governance is definitely becoming one of the conditions for the AI or enterprise AI credibility today. Cool. So let me bring in another challenge that many enterprises are dealing with today. Should AI-ready data management be centralized, or should it be fragmented or not fragmented, domain-led or federated? So what's your view on that?
You know, not trying to sound like some sort of politician. The answer will always start with "it depends," I guess. But I think as a general rule, clearly, as we've just talked about a lot, the data itself is quite different in different domains of the business. Some may be very dynamic, some may be quite fixed, some may be more managed in its approach. You can imagine the difference between, in my world, network operations and the finance department. Both have some very important data and information, but it acts in a different way and it comes in a different form. So being able to have some localized management of that type of data needs different approaches. So that needs to be, if you like, local with the centralized rules. And I think that's a sensible. And the balance between the two will obviously be an enterprise view of how they work, both operationally, but also what's sensible in those approaches.
Got it. Got it. No, makes sense. Yeah. And okay, so that's a very interesting perspective. In terms of looking ahead 2 to 3 years from now, how do you see this market evolving? From your perspective, David.
Well, I think everywhere, and of course we haven't got a crystal ball, but I think everywhere we're seeing now, particularly with agentic AI and businesses and the large consultancies really thinking about how we can do work differently. So it's not just about, as we said before, not just about automation. And so maybe we're going to start seeing more companies move away from maybe a functional structure. I don't want to say silos because that's probably unfair to a number of companies, but actually get more organized around the actual business process itself. So what's the key business process end to end? And that starts by having mixed teams. Then that starts to give more ownership of that data because you then see that whole process and therefore, as you said earlier, the data movement from A through to wherever it may be, through all the various areas, that complete ownership from start to finish. And what does that mean in what's needed to be accomplished and the outcomes, which will then, of course, feed into how the AI agents will work. So I do think we'll see more of that. We'll see more of, as we described, AI managing the data, the understanding of that broad scope of data. So it isn't just what we might have thought as formal data in the past, but all of the know-how and knowledge across a business. And how do we bring that together? We've heard instances of some companies, particularly I think the consultancies, where they're trying to teach the LLMs from the keystrokes of their employees. And that may be a bit extreme, and we may not like that, but you can see what they're trying to do there is capture that know-how and knowledge that's potentially in people's brains. So we do need to maybe think about how we do that from a societal point of view as well.
Yeah.
But I think they're the kind of areas that will move. And then that will allow us, I think, to then think about the data in different ways. And as you rightly highlighted earlier, that whole context, the semantics
Yeah.
of the data, because the same data can have a different meaning, as we know, not only from enterprise to enterprise, but maybe even in different parts of the business, depending on how it's used or what part of the business life cycle it's in. Above all, is this great understanding that this is not an IT thing. Successful change in AI won't be led by IT, but will be led, it needs to be seen as a business transformation. And I know we've overused that phrase probably in the last few years, but it is probably this is a genuine transformation, but it needs to be led by the operational leaders thinking about how do we want the business to operate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a big one. There's a real difference between using AI occasionally and building an operating model that is AI enabled and governed. So I think that's the shift that we are seeing in this space. Okay, so now comes the fun part of the conversation, David. where we will try to compress, the board level topics into one sentence answers. So let's do a quick rapid fire round before we close. And all we need is just one sentence answers from you. So are you up for it, David?
I'll do my best.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So let's go. First one. What is the biggest mistakes companies are making in AI today?
Treating AI as an IT led experiment rather than business led.
Absolutely. Great answer. Next, what is the most undervalued capability in the modern data management?
Lack of understanding of the semantics of the data.
Yes, absolutely. I can't agree more. Next is what should CIOs do in the next, say, 90 days?
I think you need to discuss with your SLT or board what are the opportunities that AI gives the business and encourage your colleagues to be using their imagination.
Mhm.
I think it's not about thinking about the technology, it's about using their imagination of how the business can improve and doing things that they never thought they could do before.
Oh, that's great advice, David. And finally, what is the one phrase that best defines the future of enterprise AI?
One phrase. That's not easy.
I don't think.
Um, I'd say probably just exciting.
Okay, interesting, interesting. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, well done. The rapid round, amazing, amazingly done. And I can tell you, David, with your years of experience of, as a CIO and as a senior leader, that I think clearly helped you getting straight to the point. You made this whole rapid fire round look so easy. So, all right. So before we wrap up, David, I think let me just ask you maybe one final thought. If there's one message that you want to give our listeners to take away from today's conversation, what would that be?
I think although it is a complex subject, you can get to the basics of it from a business perspective. And of course, there are lots of tools to help you then do it once you've decided what to do from a business point of view. But don't narrow your focus. Look across the business, look at all your information, and then say, how do we do better?
Interesting, interesting. That's a very strong note to end. And if I were to leave our listeners with kind of some quick takeaways, I've been taking some notes. I think first, AI and data can't be treated as two separate conversations anymore,
No.
right? If AI is going to move beyond pilots and actually delivering business value, then I think the data foundation has to be, as you said, trusted, governed, and ready. I mean, no
Yeah.
questions about it, right? The second takeaway I think we talked about is we need to think about data differently. So it's not just about information sitting in systems, it's the knowledge of the enterprise. And managing that well means creating a foundation that both people and AI can actually use with confidence. So I think that's the second part. And thinking about a final point, I think it's important to clarify that governance and trust, they are not there to slow things down. They are important aspects of AI. They are what makes scale possible, and the organizations will, who will adopt the innovation and discipline will basically take it to the finish line as far as AI is concerned, right?
Yeah,
So
no, absolutely. They should be seen as extra tools, as you say, not to slow things down.
exactly, exactly. Great, awesome. So with that, we come to the end of podcast. David, thank you so very much for joining us. This has been a great discussion, and I think we've kind of managed to keep both hype and jargon under reasonable control. But I think on a more serious note, really appreciate the depth of insights and your perspectives that you've brought to the table. And I hope that we will have another opportunity to continue the discussion on maybe another interesting topic again in the near future.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. It's been really interesting. Thanks.
Thank you, David. And thanks to everyone listening to Data Enablers from Edgematics. If this conversation resonated with you, please do share it with your peers and your leadership teams. The convergence of AI and data management is not a future discussion. It's a business and leadership priority right now, right? Until next time, I'm Raheel Khan, and this has been Data Enablers.